Hey everybody, it's Justin with another KTOD deck tech, this time talking about double blue Chirrut. Let's go right into the deck. Um, and we are going to talk a little bit about the list today, but we're also going to talk about the deck building process. So unlike other deck techs where you're going to be on one screen with the entire list, I'm actually going to take you through the deck building process the way I made this list, which was through the turns in a regular game. Here's a list in its entirety. Really, we're looking at double blue for vigilance and security complex. We're not playing any of the other double aspect colors in blue. But we're going to talk a little bit also about what we're not missing in getting into green or these other colors. So let's talk a bit about the way that I constructed this list um, and kind of jump into it. So looking at turn one, what I was really looking for were units that had a lot of defense, high defensive values. Some people call it big bottoms or big booties on these units. So looking at the droids as my two rebel units with four defense, only the one power, only the one attack, but you're really suiting them up so much in the later turns that that's okay. The Rebel Pathfinder gives us that fourth unit when the Saboteur techs can come in handy if you're trying to knock off shields. And then the big one here is Regional Governor, much stronger against decks like Boba and Iden that have very specific cards that you want to name, like Waylay or No Good to Me Dead against Boba. There's some specific cards to name against Iden as well, but that's when you're definitely going to be prioritizing in those matchups. So really looking at aggressively mulliganing to make sure you have one of these units in your hand on turn one. So that's the biggest thing. So you're playing one. Now, given the context of the matchup and also the context of your hand, you will decide to play one of these before you lay a resource. Um, Oftentimes, the rebel units are better against the aggro red and green decks, where regional governor is better against the more sort of control-ish mid-range decks. So keep that in mind when you're rowing. If you've got C3PO and R2D2, you might consider keeping both, but for the most part, your turn one play is going to be play a two drop and resource any of the other two drops that you have. So that's your general turn one play. You're almost always going to not have the initiative because you're going to also put a shield on your turn one play. There's a few instances where if you have the initiative, you may want to keep it, but for the most part, you are um, keeping the initiative. The sort of one corner case, if you have the initiative, excuse me, not keeping the initiative and actually just wasting it to put the shield on a unit. The one corner case there is if you have the initiative and you play a rebel unit, and then they play a ground unit, and you have fleet lieutenant, and you just want to use that value of jamming in a fleet lieutenant, in which case you would then put the shield on probably your fleet lieutenant on the subsequent turn. So the real benefit to this deck is you are jamming something early on the ground, and you are um, on turn two, as we're going to see, we're suiting up. Okay, so we're putting a upgrade on it in the form of Luke's lightsaber and Jedi lightsaber, Electro Staff as well, or we are using a unit to create either a permanent buff with Wing Leader or a temporary buff to gain tempo with Fleet Lieutenant. Now, Fleet Lieutenant is a little bit different because it's not a permanent benefit, but it allows us to then have two creatures on the battlefield, two units on the battlefield. And considering the size of our rebel units on the first turn, most likely that would knock out their unit as well. So we would be at 2-0. So it's just too much value to pass up. One of the things you'll notice about the turn one plays is that there are no space units. And the primary reason for that is that we are trying to buff our turn one play every single time. And while Wing Leader would be great to buff a space unit, it's just not consistent enough to recognize that. And you can't put a lightsaber on a space unit. You cannot put a Electrostaff on a space unit, and you can't put Luke's lightsaber on a space unit. So I'm sort of looking at consistency when I made this list of really looking at doing the same thing every single time in all our games. So we want to be playing a unit and then suiting it up. The three Luke's lightsabers might seem a little bit weird. We're not even a Luke deck. We're a Chirrut deck. but the 3/1 benefit is very valuable. And again, we're generally going to have less units than our opponent, but we want to have one sort of larger units, one sort of a leader before our real leader comes out. This is our first wave of having one unit that's just better than anything else on the battlefield. So suiting it up is very key, and Luke's lightsaber gives that ability to our early units. You can think about we play a 1/4, we shield it, and that then becomes a 4/5 on the second turn of the game with a shield, which is incredibly powerful. One thing about the sequencing here is that you don't want to necessarily be attacking bases early on. You really want to be using your buffed up units to sort of control the battlefield. Obviously, you can't do that if they play space units, but you generally want to wipe out a ground unit if you can. So whether it's a Sabine green deck that's got the 3/3 unit on the battlefield, just wipe it off, trade your shield to kill their guy, and then kind of go from there. Understand that your first wave is trying to kind of keep the battlefield free of threats. Now, I've described sort of very specific um, occurrences where you're playing a unit and then you're buffing it and you're attacking. There are times when that doesn't work, whether you just don't draw an early unit or maybe there's some way that they're figuring out, maybe whether it's through Saboteur or something that kills a shield, maybe a Vader, and they actually kill your early unit, and you need a good plan B. So Yoda is almost always not what you want to play on turn 3. You almost always want to be buffing your turn 1 play, whether it's with a wing leader, fleet lieutenant, or an actual upgrade. But sometimes it just doesn't work, right? Like they might no good to you. You dead an early drop, and it's just you just lose out on tempo, and you want a good plan B. And Yoda really is the best plan B in this regard. He can then sort of take the ball, sort of take the handoff of maybe he gets the shield now if you see this coming. And then he's going to get the upgrades and the lightsabers. And of course, if he gets a lightsaber, it's great. He's a Force unit. He's a Rebel unit as well. So we can really sort of reap all of the benefits of our deck. And he has the nice play that if he does hit the bin, that you eventually draw a card. So you ultimately draw a card when he does. So nice little play here, just in case it all doesn't come together. And it works out with the deck list with the the card slots that we're looking for. Okay, so if you envision the way the game's sequenced, you've played a unit, you've buffed it, they've done some things. If you're not able to sort of gain a super huge advantage, and they've now had 2 turns to sort of develop their board, it could be getting to the case where you're starting to get outnumbered. So the third turn of the game, the fourth resource turn, is really about answering their action. So if you notice, we have 3 X's of all of the following cards. We've got just straight up removal in the form of takedown. It's obviously shines against Sabine. In the mirror, it's really good. It's just a great sort of card that's very fair and just sort of says, okay, take out your best unit that's happened in the first 3 turns. The Force is with me is a card that oftentimes you don't just want to just play it right away. But if you've got a 3/6 unit by virtue of an Electro Staff or a Wing Leader, this card can actually take out a Sabine. So you can kind of be a bit more patient with it versus a more aggressive strategy. But you really want to be using Forces with me as a removal spell. So it doesn't always get played on turn 3. It's probably the weakest of these 4 cards. Vigilance, therefore, is the best, though. Giving yourself a shield, or if there has been sort of a really aggressive start, maybe against Sabine, being able to heal and kill one of their units is huge. Big thing that kind of recent addition is the System Patrolcraft. That's been really effective against Sabine lane dodging. So playing with cards like Green, Squadron A-Wing, or Red 3, System Patrolcraft really sort of allows us to sort of stop that that sort of real aggressive start in space. All right, now this brings us to our next turn, which is turn 5. So this is the turn your hero's coming out. This is your second wave now. So the first wave is that first unit, and we're making that sort of your own leader. And now you're dealing with your second wave, which is turn 4, Chirrut comes out, and you really want to be doing 2 things. Now, It Binds All Things is really a great card to play on this turn. You can play it a few different ways. You can actually attack aggressively with your Chirrut, take some damage, maybe even before you play a Jedi lightsaber on them, to actually soak up the 3 damage and then deal it to an opposing unit, killing it and also healing it off of yours. But if you notice, all 5 of our upgrades are 3 cost units or 2 cost units on the right side that we're able to play on turn 3. These 5 things can also go on Chirrut. So one thing that comes up pretty frequently is if you have 2 of these on turn 3, you kind of want to play. You have to think ahead a bit about which ones you want to go on to Chirrut and which one you want to go onto your unit. So if you think about having both lightsabers, let's say you have a Jedi lightsaber and a Luke's lightsaber. Well, the Jedi lightsaber might actually be better on the 2-drop because you've got a shield to waste, and you can get that up to being a 4/5 pretty early. You've got a shield, the 5 damage gets soaked up, and then the Jedi lightsaber with Chirrut really just sort of takes you home. It kills any opposing leader unit, which is pretty amazing, and really can kind of make Chirrut sort of a beast as you ride the wave to victory. So really you're looking at playing 2 of these things on turn 5. So there's no 5 drops. There's no Vanquish in the deck because you want to be doing sort of 2 things, really pulling ahead, understanding that in the early turns you haven't been playing 2 units at the same time. So this is really your second wave. And again, it's very predicted. The way I built this deck was I wanted to build the deck to do this on turn 4, our 5th resource turn, and really sort of distinguish yourself where you've got, maybe at this point, they've actually dealt with your early creep unit. They've had to spend a card. They've maybe almost had to 2-for-1 themselves to take that out. They're feeling like they're in the clear, and now you've got an even harder to deal with unit in your leader of Chirrut. After that is our sort of after turn 4 way that this deck comes together. So you've got Obi-Wan and Luke. So this sort of represents the last wave. Especially Luke is that sort of card that can take you home if the game sort of becomes more grindy. He sort of, he's such a powerful unit that he can kind of take over himself. And you do happen to have the 3 Luke's lightsabers, which almost never end up on Luke, because by that point you probably won the game if he hits the table. But you do still have that interaction in the deck. Obi-Wan is nice. There are a few times where you actually will not bring up your Chirrut on the 4th turn, on the 5th resource turn. You actually wait so that Obi-Wan can sort of protect him. That would be if you were really up against an aggressive start. However, at that point, they're probably attacking your base anyway, so that comes up pretty infrequently. So that's the deck. I'm pretty happy the way it's playing right now. It's been really effective against aggressive strategies with that sequencing. You're able to get these really gigantic units, which is really fun to attack a base for 10 or 8 and just really take the game over. So here's the list. It's in entirety now. There's some really unique interactions between it with the droids drawing extra cards. And sometimes it's not even the droids interacting, like having both out, because you rarely have 2 of those low-cost units out at the same time. Every so often it does pop up where you'll have your turn 2 would be after playing a 3PO, you would play, say, a Luke's lightsaber and an R2 for 3 costs total. But for the most part, you've only got 1 of them out. But their abilities are really relevant. 3PO can name 2. You've got a lot of 2-cost cards. Oftentimes, you'll resource those cards. Drawing It Binds All Things off of a 3PO is fantastic. And then R2 can just sort of sift through your deck. You can loot through your deck until you find exactly what you want. So maybe you're digging for that 5 life gain with Vigilance. That's a card that often comes up as a card you're looking for. Jedi Lightsaber is a really important card to draw. So he gets you to find what you're looking for, and especially post-board, I value R2 a little bit more because you'll see in a second, we'll talk about a sideboard plan where you're looking for being a little bit more grindy and you can kind of sift through your curve versus your really powerful high-impact cards. So getting to the sideboard, you'll notice on the right, I've got the Ghost, I got the 3rd copy of Luke Skywalker and 3 copies of Redemption. So one of the things that oftentimes will happen in sideboard games is they'll be looking at bringing in cards that take away your upgrades. So you're oftentimes boarding out your Luke's lightsabers, you're boarding out your Electro Staffs, maybe even your Jedi lightsabers, and instead you're just bringing in units and removal. You've got the 2 copies of Vanquish there. They come in, they're good universal removal. And you've also got the 3 force throws, which obviously don't work. They cost 3, but you're looking at now your turn 5. So going back up to, excuse me, your turn 4, your 5th resource turn, you're looking at playing It Binds All Things and a force throw. Or even just a regional governor who sort of becomes very powerful after postboard 2, locking out specific sideboard cards. But that's a good turn to play the force throw, especially against a deck like Boba, where you can throw um, a large unit. And at that point, you'd have 3 redemptions and 3 Lukes in your deck. So there's no issue with actually just ditching one of those, killing a Boba right away, and being able to regroup if you're a bit behind. So that's the deck. Let us know in the chat and comments how it does for you. One of the nice things about it, although it's got some expensive cards, it is relatively low budget. Um, it's a great deck if you went to a pre-release and you picked up a few rares. Maybe you pulled a Vigilance and you're not really sure how to play it. The Lukes you actually could substitute out. They're not integral to the deck, so if you wanted to play a card like Protector to jam in there, you could. But it's not. This deck is not the most sort of demanding on the wallet, so it's a nice deck to pick up. It's really super fun to play. It's got some great matchups, like a Luke Green deck. It's got a really good matchup there where they have a really tough time sort of hitting those 3 waves that I was talking about. That first unit with a Luke's lightsaber is pretty hellish for them. So it's got some great matchups. Obviously, I don't think it's necessarily like tier 1. There's some really strong decks out there, Boba and some of the Sabine variations and Iden. Um, in the long run, I think are going to be more successful in a deck like this. But this one's really fun to try out. It's definitely unique the way it plays, and it has its own sort of thought process behind it. So I hope you enjoy it. Last topic that I want to mention is what didn't make the cut. So at first, the Restored Arc was really in the deck. It looked perfect for the deck, and you said, okay, 2/3 comes out early. You can restore, which is great when you're always attacking. The problem with this card is that it really doesn't trade well with any of the other good space units. And unless you get Wing Leader or Fleet Lieutenant, you're really not able to keep up. So it just doesn't match up well, and you end up sort of trying to fight them in a world where you're not as advantaged, because then your turn 4, you've got cards like lightsabers, and it just doesn't add up. So it's not great. If the force throw plan is not your cup of tea and you're really not trying to sort of angle shoot that way, I could see boarding these a bit, sort of playing a little bit more of a fair, grindier game, but I haven't been that impressed with them. And then there's other cards that people have in sideboards, cards like Bright Hope that might come in just for the opposing angle, where I'm just not a huge fan. And I'd rather just sort of get really aggressive on the ground, where Chirrut can kind of come in as the big buddy towards the end and really push the aggression there. The other card I'm not a huge fan of that I had for a while was Guardian of Wills. Um, the ability to make the unit cost 1 less isn't actually all that relevant, because all that really does is it allows you to sort of jam an extra 2-drop on turn 2. Obviously, if you have, let's say, a Jedi lightsaber and Electro Staff, you could put both of them in the Guardian, but that's almost a bit too much committed. And the ability to, let's say, play a second 2-drop and a Luke's lightsaber on the same unit on the second turn of the game, it's just not that valuable. And the Force user aspect also isn't that valuable. The 2 cards that refer to Force users, It Binds All Things and One with the Force, just that benefit isn't that important, and oftentimes you're doing it later on anyway when Chirrut's the target there. So really just a pretty low impact card. And the other issue with this card is that it just dies too early as well. Even with your ability to shield it up, it gives decks with ECLs can come in and really swoop in and kill it early on. So it's just, you really want that 4 toughness, and Guardian of the Wills just didn't make it. Keenan, again, is this card that sort of seems so perfect for the deck. He was in most of the iterations of it. However, with the recent technology of ECL and the Sabine decks, Keenan just doesn't sit on the table. So on turn 4, if you remember, I keep saying turn 4, I apologize. 4 resources, third turn of the game. that's the turn you really want to answer their building up of a board. And by just playing a unit that then they can ambush something in to kill, Steadfast Battalion just completely dwarfs Keenan. So he's not in the 50, and nor is he in the 10, the sideboard. He's just not a unit that does enough. And you really want to be sticking to your plan of those sequencing turns. So he's just on the outside looking in, even though his stats are fantastic. There is a thought of maybe him over Yoda. However, you sort of know Yoda gives you a whole other turn cycle to sort of plan your events out and how you're going to sequence things. So I actually like Yoda over Keenan. I could be swayed on that to go Keenan over Yoda, thinking, okay, they've dealt with your unit. They maybe had to 2-for-1 themselves, and then Keenan comes in and can sort of restart the party right before Chirrut. That's the sort of one selling point there of that reset plan, but he's really that plan B. So it's possible that he's better than Yoda as a plan B, but I'm really seeing Yoda as I think being a better, cheaper cost unit there that oftentimes sort of isn't part of your plan. So hope you enjoyed the video and let me know in the comments what you think. Take it easy.